Hi, and welcome to the Community Dialogue. My name is Amy Robb, and I'm one of the co-founders of Advance Humanity. And I'm thrilled to be here today to introduce our interviews and dialogues around our theme of the month. Before I introduce you to our guest today, I would like to take a moment to say a special thank you to Steve Giroux of Third Generation Design. Steve is the man behind the camera here who's doing the taping, and he has set up this wonderful set for us to do this interview. So I again would like to thank him, Third Generation Design, and if you would like to find out more about Third Generation Design, you can go to thirdgenerationdesign.com. He is an affiliate partner for Advance Humanity, and we look forward to seeing him more. Okay, so today here in January, our theme is to live simply. My guest speaker or guest interviewer today is Jeffrey Hamelman. I've known Jeffrey for a little over 3 years. He works at King Arthur Flour in Norwich, Vermont. He is the certified master baker there, and he heads up the bakery. He also is my mentor in beekeeping. The reason I asked him today to come and talk with us in a dialogue about living simply is that I wanted to learn more from him, how he maintains a full-time job. He does some beekeeping, he travels quite a bit, he has some experience underneath his belt, so to speak, and I really wanted to find out more from him how he lives simply. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Jeffrey Hamelman. Hello, Jeffrey.
Hi.
Nice to see you again.
As always.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're here today to talk about this theme that's so important to, I think, all of us, to live simply. When I think about living simply, I don't think about living a boring life. I think about trying to balance life and its craziness and its busyness and living in this world of high technology. And so you are my mentor in beekeeping. You make the best damn bread that I know of around, and so I thought maybe today we could talk about your life experience, and maybe you could talk about who you are, where you come from, and what has brought you here.
Okay. First, I think I'll start with a disclaimer, because all the days leading up to this dialogue, I don't think I confessed to you that I don't personally think that I live very simply. You do, but I don't.
Shock factor. Oh my God. Okay. Well,
truly though, I mean, obviously it's all relative, isn't it? But while I was thinking about this, I remembered an experience that I had in the mid-1970s. I had been farming for a few years and thinking that I might like to do that work as my livelihood. It was in Western Massachusetts. It was disastrous financially, but it was just perfect for the soul of a young man. But I couldn't pay the bills, and so I leapt at the offer to go and work at an artist community in the Berkshires, because I was at last going to get a steady income. I made $20 a week, plus room and board, and I spent about a year there. And after I'd been there for about 8 months, I went and hitchhiked across the country, and I wanted to make it a slight detour and go to the part of the country where a lot of the early blues music came from. So I went and hitched down through the Mississippi Delta. And I remember having a feeling that, you know, I'm making about $5,000 a year. And I feel like I have complete mobility in my life. I feel like I have opportunities in my life. I feel like I've got these broad possibilities and horizons. And when I look around at the poverty and the just sort of what I'm seeing, it just seemed to me, you know, I'll bet you a lot of these people are making $5,000 a year. How come I have the ability to hitchhike across the country because I want to? What is it that separates us? So I think my answer was that maybe there was some kind of a cultural separation between us, because if you are brought up with the message that your life is full of possibilities, you're much more likely to have an expansive life. And if you're brought up with this kind of culture of poverty, then you're much less likely. So I think right off the bat, I guess I was pretty lucky to have had the kind of upbringing I did, because it wasn't particularly well-to-do. I think my parents were kind of lower middle class. somewhere in there, but they valued education, they valued independent thinking and things like that. So I was very lucky for that.
Oh, that is interesting. I'm still in the shock factor when you thought, or you told me that you didn't think that you lived a simple life. And from my perspective, knowing that you have a full-time job at King Arthur Flour, and you do community work, you travel a lot for your job, you're married, you do have some children. I don't know how much you're involved with your children, but you always have a calm presence about yourself when I see you. And I love being around you. And for me personally, I am striving to live a more simple life. And again, I say not a boring life, but how do I weed out the craziness that I've created for myself? Or we live in a culture of busyness, and the IT world and the technology that we use all the time and the noises we hear all the time. And so I know for myself, one thing that I do is I don't watch TV. I do watch some videos, but I've taken TV out of my diet, so to speak. But I was curious, if you don't see yourself living a simple life, what do you see then?
Well, certainly life is full, very full life. Yeah, full-time job, lots of kids, grandkids, incredible wife, as you know. So these all help make life full. My work life is full, and I love my work life. So I don't know. I mean, there's nothing special about my life. You know, like many people who've made it to 6+ decades, you will have experienced hardship, and you will have experienced joy, and probably boredom, and probably, you know, doubt, and probably inner reconciliations. I mean, every human emotion, we're probably all going to experience at some time if we live a full life, meaning in terms of longevity. So maybe one of the reasons that I come off as being calm to you is that simply the fact that I've lived longer than you, I've experienced a lot of these things, and so it isn't that it makes it easier to remember sadness or hardship, but I think perhaps as I age, I get the ability to put it more into context, the overall context. So sure, I'm still desperately worried about a lot of the directions that the world is going in, not just because I do have children and grandchildren, but because, you know, all of life on earth is precious, and just the idea of a lot of the things that are happening that are jeopardizing that is really troubling. But maybe in the aggregate, I've been able to kind of compartmentalize that stuff, and so my overall sense of life is a little bit more easygoing than it might have been 10, 20, 30 years ago.
What kind of advice would you give somebody like me, your friend, who tends to be anxious and busy and, looking for that balance? Do you talk to your children like this, or do you talk to your coworkers or people that are looking to you for guidance about life's balance? Or
no, I don't. I mean, maybe without putting any words to things, maybe I'm setting an example. I don't know. If I am, I hope it's a good example, so I don't really know. But I guess we all make choices, and if in retrospect, if I start looking at some of the choices that I've made, I actively wanted to have manual work for my livelihood. So being a baker has been a wonderful, wonderful way to do that. I think there's also an element of baking that can have the potential to give your life a really good perspective or context. What I mean to say is baking is very ephemeral, right? You go to work, you work hard, you take off your apron, there's your products for the day. You go home, next day they're gone. Yeah. Start over again. So it's almost like this microcosm that's constantly repeating itself. And I think in my life, and I bet you it's the same with a lot of bakers who have stayed with it for decades, I think there's this gradual feeling where you're transferring that ephemeral nature of baked goods to a whole concept of how the ephemeral nature of life. And I think I'm not expressing that very well, but I think that's something that's taken hold in me, taken root in me, is this sense of part of my personal philosophy about the ephemeral nature of baking came into me, and it's now how I look at life. Ephemeral, not in a scary way of like, oh my God, I'm going to die any day now. You know, that's the case. But so and I'm sorry I didn't express that well. But the other thing that has had a huge impact is just when I started trying to be a farmer and that didn't work. Well, then I just became a super avid gardener.
Yeah.
So as you know, we don't buy any food, vegetables. For home use. You know, we'll go out to dinner or something now and again, but for home use we grow everything on a 12-month basis with the root cellar, with the hoop house, with the big beds in the garden. And I think anybody who's really engaged, not just physically, but emotionally or spiritually, that's a tough word to use because it can, you know, lead places. But anyway, I think if you're engaged in food, then you see a lot of the reality of life too through that, and that can make you feel pretty secure about being a living, sentient being.
I would agree with that. I mean, I do enjoy baking myself and like to do it. And when you were talking, I was just thinking about your profession, and anytime you hand me a loaf of whatever you made that day, or when you bring it to a party, you get an instant reaction of people's joy off of that. And I was thinking, your choices in life, what you want to do for a profession or as a hobby, your avocation in the sense of baking or gardening or pickling, and in this we are now beekeepers, or I try to be a beekeeper, but there's some great joy in producing that honey from the land, from the bees, and being able to give it to somebody. And I'm really excited about seeing how excited they are about receiving something like that. So that must feed the soul, pardon the pun, but actually feed your soul when people are so excited about the bread you bring.
Yeah, that's a great point, Amy, because one of the things that bakers have the ability to do is to provide nourishment and pleasure. And, you know, how many jobs are out there that provide nourishment and pleasure? So right there, you're in like a really, really good place, right? And with the bees, I mean, I started the bees in 1982, and I don't think that was a voluntary choice. There was something compelling for me. I'd never seen the inside of a beehive. This was long before you could look on YouTube and spend 3 weeks just looking at people showing you how to keep bees, you know. So it was like read a book and then just buy some bees and dive right in. And so I think that was something that I had to do for whatever reason. I still don't know why, but it really became such a profound experience. And you've looked inside your beehives enough for the last 2 or 3 years that you know what I mean when I talk about the profundity of looking in a beehive. To me, like everybody, I need to have a feeling of security. And one of the places that I constantly get it is just seeing the way the bees organize their life and how much it makes sense, and the whole concept of, you know, an individual is part of a whole. He's not the only important thing out there, but just the way the bees operate like a superorganism where, you know, there's 50,000 individuals who are donating their lives and their labors to the good of the whole. There's a bit we could learn about that in the U.S. in the 21st century.
Yeah, I would agree with you. While we're trying to create advanced humanity, right? Trying to be a small part in a bigger part and bring lots of people together to do a lot of good things. And as we've talked about this, having a low entry barrier to be a humanitarian. You can do so much with so little, very simple resources. So connecting to the land is what I'm hearing. Connecting to a species, for instance, the bees that have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, if I'm correct with that.
Millions and millions.
Millions, I get corrected. Yeah. So working with your hands, it's a good thing. Do you meditate? Do you exercise?
I exercise, yeah. And I try to have it where my life has some form of physical activity that's part of it. So obviously gardening steadily is one thing. Heating with wood. I've heated with wood since the mid-70s, with the exception of 2 odd years when I was living out of Vermont. And wood heat is another one of those places for me that I feel like I'm connected to something local. even though I don't go in the woods and chop trees down. If there's a tree on my property that's down, I might go in if it's easy enough to use my chainsaw and chop it up and bring it back. I'll do that, but I don't, as a rule, gather my own wood. But that's just another way that I find, you know, some people would say, you talk about living simply. I mean, look at that wood. You got to stack it. You got to bring it inside. You got to sweep the floor. You got to clean your chimney. That's not simple. Simple is just calling up the oil company and saying,
right,
deliver it.
Right.
But that's just got hidden complexities that heating with wood doesn't. And I'd prefer the quality of the heat that comes from wood, and I prefer the kind of localness of the endeavor, you know, compared to shipping oil across the ocean. And all the things that go along with that, not even to think about some of the political aspects of some of the countries that are sending us oil. So
interesting. You know, this month in January, talking about the theme of living simply, Travis and I have been talking, and Bonnie and I have been talking, and we all want to put a definition on it, and everybody has a personal definition of what that is. Do you have a definition of what it is or what it is not, or is that just too complex? I mean, that's what we're getting to the essence in this dialogue. But
I don't think I have a definition. I think for my life, I feel the most kind of inner security when I feel like the things that I'm engaged in are circles. That it's not that I'm doing some kind of work that's just going out here. It all loops back and connects with itself. So again, the cycle of baking, if you want to start with that, it's a literal thing, and it could also be a metaphor, right? That daily ephemeral cycle of baking. And I think, you know, my deepest sense of security comes from nature, bar none. And the bees, which I've already talked about enough, they're kind of the gateway into my feeling that deep security that comes from feeling that nature ultimately is going to have a righting instinct, and that everything is going to be okay. There'll be that kind of sloppy perfection of nature long after we humans are history. You know, when that eye blink is over, nature will keep going, and that fills me with most of the confidence and serenity that I have, because, you know, I don't think I've ever once gotten bored looking at the clouds in the sky, or seeing the way the moon is rising, or just seeing a little bit of light on the underside of a bird wing that's reflecting from the sun when it flies by you. These things really, I mean, talk about ephemeral, those things are so ephemeral, but for me, that's simple, but that really feeds me big time, things like that.
Right. Well, I hear about that feedback loop that you're talking about, and again, those are choices that you make in your life. And maybe the way I'm hearing this is the choices that you've made. You're not just spending your time, your energy, your livelihood, and things that just go out and disappear, or you never get the feedback. Somehow it comes back to you and feeds your soul, or it gives you value or purpose. And that's what I'm hearing, at least, or that's what I'm taking in. So the choices that I make for Amy today, or would be that I just don't put something out there without, you know, hoping that it comes back. The intention is set that it will come back in some manner and feed my soul, or give me a purpose, a feeling. And sometimes you might just give for the purpose of giving and knowing what that is, and never know what comes of that.
Right.
But I hear that feedback loop is very important in your nature and in your choices.
That's right. I think one of the things that's most dangerous in current U.S. society, just like, you know, the whole fast food industry, the people who are really developing it are just brilliant. I mean, they know how to hit flavor things that trigger things in your mind that make you want more. I mean, this is so well documented, but they've got that down to a science, so that when you're eating, you know, junk food, processed food anyway, from a young age, your brain waves are really hooking in on that and saying, yeah, this is my definition of what's good. And it's been, for that industry, just brilliant the way they've been able to develop that. I think there's a corollary in the tech field. I think the people who are driving the tech industry also have figured out how to get people hooked, how to get their brains hooked on the technology. And I think that's really dangerous, because we've all been in restaurants where two people are not even looking at each other because they're looking at this cell phone, and that's not an anomaly anymore. That's really common. And the ubiquitous nature of that, I think, maybe people aren't connected to their fellow humans so much, I don't think, and that's a real danger. I think I would fall into that. I would become a check my email every 5 minutes addict if I had a cell phone.
Right.
Because I don't think I could withstand that. But I don't have a cell phone, and people laugh at me about that all the time.
I do.
But I have a track phone.
He has a track phone, guys. He has a track phone. Yeah, it was good. It was good when we had to hook up in Boston. No doubt. That was great.
And that's the only time I use it is when I'm traveling, because you can't find a cell phone. You can't find a payphone
anymore
in an airport anymore. Right. So it's a tool. Right. But I think if I had a cell phone, I can't imagine what it would be like to be standing in the middle of a beautiful river fly fishing and listening to your phone go off.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a voluntary decision. It's not like it means that I have difficulty being in touch with the people who I want to be in touch with. Right. I can do that without a cell phone. I can do that without Facebook. I can do that without Twitter. You know, somebody told me a month ago that so-and-so, somebody I knew, and his girlfriend, who I knew, were getting married. And I naively thought that they had contacted my friend and called him up or something, or emailed him and said they're getting married. I said, wow, did you talk to them? No, I read it on Facebook. So you're finding out when 200 other people are finding out. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not exactly a personal message, I don't think. Right. And I just would rather not inform you of what's going on in my life by sending out these blast messages on Facebook. I'd rather call you up or email you or get together for lunch or something like that. And maybe I'm lucky that I didn't grow up with that technology to begin with. I think kids today who are 25 or younger, where that was part of their upbringing, it's probably more of a challenge for them to put it aside. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my daughter is 18 years old, and she grew up with that, and try to learn how to navigate with the cell phones and how fast she can fly on the laptops. She blows me away. So it's part of their DNA. But
it's one thing, there's a tender line between a tool and a crutch. Yeah. Right?
Right. Good point.
And for a lot of people, the modern technologies are becoming more of a crutch than a tool. Mm-hmm. It's like, can you sit still in a quiet room and just watch as the sun gradually goes down for the day? Mm-hmm. Or are you freaking out because you haven't, received or sent an email in the last 5 minutes? Mm. Now, by the way, I think a lot of times when people are frantically looking at their cell phones for messages, they're not really happy. They don't look happy. They look like they're full of anxiety. Mm. Sociologically, something is going on there too. Psychologically, something's going on there. I'm checking to see, but I don't have a message, so you feel kind of a little deflated or something.
So Jeffrey, I'm really getting the knowledge or the feel from you that there's a lot of universal themes in what you've been talking about today. Imparting with us in this dialogue that we had, would you want to share anything else?
Well, yeah, two things I'd like to share. I think about days when I was younger, and I did a lot of traveling, usually by the Great Thumb Route, just hitchhiking here and there, and it was wonderful. I would go to Europe for a few months at a time with a couple $100 in my pocket. And back then, you were out of touch. You could write letters to people, but you couldn't receive any mail. There were no internet cafes. You weren't hooked into anything. Nobody wants to come back after a trip like that and find out that somebody's dead or some terrible thing has happened somewhere. But I think the larger point is that having that kind of an experience, it means that you're putting your self-reliance internally. You're relying on yourself a lot more. And when you're having an overabundance of reliance on technology, then you're out here somewhere. So you're spending less time in your own private space. And I think that's maybe a little bit lacking in modern society, being in our own private space. Mm-hmm. So that's just sort of my take on technology and some of the things that it might be doing to us gradually. Other than that, we all have to figure out how to live and what values we have and all that, but ultimately, you'd hopefully conclude that our main goal is to improve the conditions of humanity. And that can take so many different forms, but if everybody had that as one of their goals, it could be, I'm rescuing stray dogs, or all the way up to I'm figuring out how to lay fiber optic cable across the bottom of the ocean and everything in between. But there are so many ways that the Earth is a little bit sick, and if everybody who's capable can devote him or herself to doing something to help cure it, then we're going to have a healed world. That's my hope. That's my belief.
Oh, that's great. That's a good place for us to wrap up today. I appreciate your time, Jeffrey, to spend with us, to share some thoughts and feelings with us. Again, I want to thank Steve Giroux of Third Generation Design for taping this. We will see you again next month in February on the topic of being a humanitarian, of all things, that we just finished up with, and how you can become a humanitarian. Very simple things that you can do. So we look forward to seeing you, and yeah, stay well until then.